How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 1 of What If Deku Had Crazy Diamond. And now, let's begin. We start this what if off with Izuku growing up in a very happy family. Both his parents had very successful jobs, and his family was just altogether happy. However, all of that would take a sudden turn for the worst when Izuku would turn the age of 4. Everything had been all sunshine and rainbows until then. However, things started to go extremely downhill. As his parents would take him to the quirk doctor office, Izuku would be sitting excitedly in his seat, shaking up and down. He was so excited and ready to hear what his quirk was. So when his name was called and they went into the room where the quirk doctor would tell them, Izuku was uncontrollably happy. He couldn't wait for the words to leave his doctor's mouth that he had an extremely powerful quirk and he was going to become the #1 hero someday. However, Izuku's hopes and dreams would never end up coming true, as the doctor would look down sadly at the little kid who was still excitedly jumping in his chair. "I'm sorry, Mrs. and Mr. Midoriya. It appears that your son, Izuku, wasn't born with a quirk. There's still a chance we got this wrong and he could be born, or not born, he could end up getting a quirk later on, but it just seems so much unlikely and the odds are stacked against him. I would stop hoping and just accept it that your son's quirkless." Izuku would immediately stop jumping up and down, as his eyes would give a look off of shock. He couldn't believe it. He was quirkless? He just couldn't understand it. His tiny 4-year-old mind just couldn't comprehend everything. As tears flowed down his eyes, and he was just sitting there motionlessly, as tears would just continue on flow out of his eyes. His parents would sit him up before hurriedly walking him out of office. Many of the parents would give a look off of sympathy, knowing that Izuku probably got a very weak quirk or was just announced quirkless. They didn't know what they'd do if their child was announced as quirkless. They just couldn't imagine it. So as Izuku would be hurriedly pushed into the car, both his parents would end up starting to argue. "Can't believe it! You worthless gave me a quirkless child! How will my legacy go on?" As they would continue on arguing all about this and that, mostly about Izuku being quirkless though, when they would end up arriving home, Izuku would see one of his parents storm off into the upstairs, where he would then storm back off with a suitcase in hand before leaving in their car. His mother would then fall to his knees, breaking down, crying, not sure what to do. As Izuku, who just couldn't comprehend what was happening, his father had just left the family due to Inko giving him a quirkless heir to his throne and power. As Izuku's father was an extremely powerful and rich businessman, and if he was told to have a quirkless son, many of the people might not even invest in him because of that stupid thing that he has a quirkless son. So he was forced to end up leaving, even though he somewhat didn't want to. He had to for the sake of his reputation at business. So as Inko lay sitting down on the floor, she would continue on crying, where she would then get a call from the job that she worked at, which happened to be the job that her husband worked at and Izuku's father. And she would then be told that she had been fired, as Izuku's father, who was basically the CEO of the company, had decided to fire her so that he couldn't see her and she couldn't even come to the workplace to tell everyone what he had done about his son. So as she lay there even crying even further, she would look on to Izuku before hugging him, trying to make Izuku feel better. However, Izuku was still too young to even understand what had just happened. So as the years would end up passing, Izuku would end up growing to be a very happy child. He had pretty much forgot about his father, besides the forever growing resentment towards him, and that stupid person happening to have left him just because Izuku was quirkless. So the one thing that Izuku didn't tell everyone was that he hated his father, and that was the one person that he hated, well, other than Bakugo Katsuki. However, Izuku was quirkless, and he really couldn't do anything to the ego-boosted Bakugo Katsuki, who everyone just loves and adores because of how powerful his quirk is. So Izuku really can't have anything go his way anymore. So as the years would end up passing, he would do the only thing he could make his mother proud in: grades. If he did very well in school, then hopefully that would make his mother proud. And do well he did. He did amazingly in his school, did better than everyone in his class. Some would even say that he had some sort of intelligence quirk. However, many of them knew that wasn't the case. So as Izuku would continue on getting straight, just max grades, getting 100% in everything he did, many of the class would end up growing resentment towards him as it made everyone think, or it made the teacher think, and even the principal in school think, oh, well, if this quirkless kid is doing so well, why aren't you kids with quirks doing so well? It made them all have higher expectations, and when they underperformed, they would be told off about it. However, Zuku was sitting there with a 100% quiz or test on his paper. So this would cause many of the class to just grow resentment towards him, much like Izuku's resentment towards his father. So, with Izuku having been hated by most of the class, Bakugo, who was the second person in that class who having the highest grades, would end up grumbling to himself that he wishes Izuku could just die or go off. How could a worthless being like Izuku somehow get such a higher grade than him? It just couldn't comprehend in his mind. So, as Bakugo was thinking this, he would utter under his breath that he wished Izuku would just vanish. And so one of his lackeys sitting next to him would take it upon himself to do just that, thinking that Bakugo might even praise him about it, as many of the class were under Bakugo's fingers, under his feet, as he was twisting them all like puppets because of how powerful his quirk was. Many of them went along with everything he said so that they wouldn't be supposedly hurt by him. So with his lackeys thinking that this was some sort of thing to basically get them to do something, they would end up acting. As one of them would end up being walking around thinking about how he'd do it, he would end up accidentally kicking something out of the dirt. He would look down to see a shiny golden arrow sitting down in the ground. As the person would pick it up, looking around at how the blade of the arrow was, they would think, oh, this should work fine. As they would then walk over and around looking for Izuku, where they would find the young 10-year-old kid walking back home as his mother had to be working countless jobs, not able to get a single job after being fired, so having to work very small jobs, just scrumming around to get paid, so she couldn't pick up Izuku from school. So as Izuku was walking home, he would end up looking back to see no one behind him. He would swear he had heard something, but he must just be mistaken. However, after he would turn back, a shadow figure would appear above him with the arrow raised overhead, slamming it down into Izuku's back, as Izuku would then fall forward, just completely confused and in pain, as he would then fall down and completely knocked out at what had happened. He would end up going in and out of consciousness, however, he really just couldn't stand up. However, after a couple hours or so, he would end up standing up again, feeling a bit dizzy. So when he would end up looking on his back, he would find nothing. He would think, what the heck was that sharp pain in his back? And it happened to be the arrow that kid had found. So, as Izuku would end up walking back home, he would end up seeing this arrow sitting on the ground right in front of him. As Izuku would pick it up, wondering what it could have been, he would assume that it was the sharp pain in his back, and being the smart child he was, he would know that it must be evidence, so he would take it and continue on walking back to his house. However, when he would end up arriving home, his mother was sitting there worriedly, just sitting down in her chair, wondering where Izuku could have been. So when the door unlocked, she would stare right at the door as Izuku would end up walking in. When she saw his green hair, she would rush over towards Izuku, hugging him. Oh, I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm sorry I couldn't pick you up. Izuku would just say, oh, it's fine. Someone stabbed me with this arrow, though. Inko would look at the blunt Izuku saying, what? What happened? As Inko would realize that Izuku had basically had a murder attempt go on at him. He basically was trying to be assassinated by someone. So as Izuku would hand her the arrow, she would look at it, completely confused at what had happened. As Izuku would take the arrow back, wondering if he could find anything about this arrow, maybe, because it looked like it was from some ancient species, he would take it to his room to do further research. However, that night, something weird would end up happening. As the next day was a Saturday, Inko decided to take Izuku out to go shopping with her, still not feeling or trusting herself to leave Izuku at home since of what happened yesterday when Izuku was out without her being there. So as they were end up walking back, they were in a fairly dangerous side of the neighborhood, as that's where they had to live, not able to afford much good houses that were very nice. They had to live in very small, cramped spaces just because Inko couldn't find a job that could support a nice house. It was a sad sight after what happened and how she fell from such a high and good paying job. So as Suzuku and them would end up being walking back through the bad neighborhood, they would end up being grabbed and pushed into a small part of an alleyway, completely dark. Their captor would then ask for their money, as Inko would shakingly grab it out of her purse, handing it to the villain, as he would then say thanks, but he can't have any witnesses for this, as he would then put down a weapon, staring it right there, as Izuku would be staring right at the barrel of this weapon. Izuku would jump right in the way. As shots would end up being fired, all of a sudden a mysterious figure would appear from right behind Izuku. However, Inko and this mysterious man couldn't see it at all. So as this mysterious man would end up grabbing all of the bullets or ammo that the person had fired from their weapon before dropping it to the ground, the guy would look on in shock before Izuku would take a step forward, now close enough in reach to the person, as the person would then feel a fist hit him right across the face, sending him flying into the brick wall right next to him, as his face would then crunch against it as teeth would fall down to the ground, bouncing up, as Izuku would look on before telling him he shouldn't have messed with his family like that, as Izuku's confidence had just grown quite a lot. He couldn't tell what he had just done, but he swore he could have seen some silver and pinkish-looking figure appear out of him, as Izuku would look over towards his mom, who looked in complete shock. Izuku, how did you do that? Izuku would just put his shoulders up like, I don't know. I swear I saw some figure standing behind me, though. Did you see it? You were behind me, after all. Inka would then just shake her head. Figure? What do you mean, a figure? As Izuku and Inko would hurry home after calling the police and telling them the area where that person had been. Where the police would then take their statements before walking back. Inko, the next day, being a Sunday, would end up taking Izuku to the quirk doctor's office, wanting to get some answers for the previous day. As Izuku would be sitting there, he would end up thinking, this thing never had happened to me before, although all the countless times I've been bullied. So could this possibly have some occurrence due to that arrow? Izuku would thinking before putting together the dots. As soon as he's stabbed with the arrow, he gets some sort of quirk thing. However, Inko couldn't see it at all, making Izuku think it wasn't some quirk. As Izuku and Inko would end up walking back into the quirk doctor's office, which the doctor had not seen Izuku in 6 years, since Izuku was quirkless, Izuku would end up looking on at the doctor, where they would take some more tests, where they would all come back just inconclusive, not having any evidence that Izuku had a quirk. Inko would look on in confusion before telling the doctor she could have sworn Izuku had stopped a robbery from them, and how Izuku said there was some sort of figure standing behind him. The doctor would look on in confusion before saying, I'm not quite sure. It's one of the many mysteries of this profession, I guess. As Izuku and Inko would end up going back home, Izuku, however, would ask for them to take a slight detour, as Izuku would saw a very old-looking library on their way back. When Izuku would end up walking into this library, he would end up looking around, seeing tall shelves towering above him, where he would then end up looking around. Finally, he would end up finding the power section all about quirks and different things. He would start looking through all of the books, and there behind many stacks of books was a very dusty leather book. Izuku would look on it before it had the engraving of stands. Izuku wasn't quite sure what it was, but it sort of just called for him to read it, so Izuku decided to check it out. And when they would end up going home, Izuku would sit at his desk reading it all night about all of the mysterious powers that a stand could possibly have. So Izuku would come to the conclusion that he had a stand, and something that no one else but him could see. So Izuku would decide not to mention it, knowing that his parents or his mom might take him to some type of medical or therapist thing, thinking that Izuku's seeing figures. So, with Izuku deciding not to tell his mother that he has some mysterious sort of power, Izuku would continue on his life, continuing to go to school. However, with this newfound power, he also got a newfound confidence in his strength. Not only confidence in his just intelligence, he was now confident in every other category, now having this amazing stand. So, with Izuku going into school, many people would look on at him, as Izuku seemed to just be glowing in bright confidence aura, as many of them just couldn't tell why Izuku seemed this way. When Izuku would end up sitting down, Bakugo, who's sitting behind him, would end up noticing it. "Hey, Deku, why don't you stop smiling? It's just ugly, alright? It's really stupid. If you don't, I'll have to break all of your damn teeth." However, Izuku would look back at Bakugo before telling him to go ahead and try. As Bakugo would end up trying this, Izuku would dodge out of this way before punching Bakugo right in face. As Bakugo would have his face slammed down into the desk, he would look on in shock at the Izuku who had just protected himself in self-defense. Many of the other classmates who were in there would end up looking on in shock as well. However, the teacher had ended up seeing this, walking in before telling Izuku to go to the principal's office, and that kind of behavior is not allowed in his classroom. As Izuku would just say, "Fine, I guess because I'm quirkless and I stand up for myself, I get to go to the principal's office the one time I do it. But when Bakugo and all the others try to bully me and harm me with physical ways, they don't give a crap. I guess that's how society is. When I become a hero, people like you are not going to be able to get a job like this, dealing with kids. You should know better." As Izuku would end up walking away, many of the class just were wondering what had happened to Izuku over the break. The one person who had stabbed Izuku with that arrow would end up getting his mind rolling. Could I possibly have done this? What did that arrow do to him? The person was thinking as Izuku would make it to the office before they would tell Izuku's parents or his mother that he had been expelled from school. Izuku wouldn't care. School was useless anyways. He had studied so far into the curriculum, he was all the way past a college level. So he just couldn't care about school. He would easily pass all of the tests within a couple minutes, and they really couldn't do anything. So school was just Izuku's nap time, as Izuku really just didn't care. He had done everything, and the teachers knew he was the smartest in the class. They can't kick him out, as that could severely lower their grade average. But with Izuku defending himself, they decided that it was over. He had to be out, as a Quirkless didn't belong in this crazy, cool school. So with Izuku gone, the school would end up falling below the average of grades, as the school would end up being under threat to just be eliminated, to end up being closed, as many of the people working there would start to scramble trying to get Izuku to come back. This was a couple months after Izuku was expelled, so Izuku would just decline. His mother also, having been told about what Izuku had done and Izuku's side of the story, Izuku would just decide to study on his own time, being homeschooled after all. So with Izuku's newfound power, he would also know he has to train it to become a hero. Training every single day, having the date pinpointed on his calendar. So he would cross off every single day until the final day had arrived, the UA entrance exams. He had finally waited 5 long, grueling years of training, and now it was time for Izuku to do this entrance exam. So as Izuku would walk in, he would sit down, looking down at the written exam that had been passed out. As Izuku would grab his pencil before easily flying through the test, flipping through all of the pages, as many of the people sitting around him would look on in shock, thinking, oh, that kid's probably just guessing all of the answers, as many of them were multiple choice. So with Izuku flying through through all of these answers, many of them would just think, oh, that kid's gonna fail. However, when Izuku finished in record time and looked so confident about his answers, many of them started to second guess all of their thoughts that Izuku was going to fail and that they just didn't have to worry about another kid. So as Izuku would do this, he would end up handing it to the teacher before walking back, putting his legs up, and just falling asleep, waiting the rest of the 3-hour time for all of the other people sitting around him to finish. Once that was done, the teacher would stretch out before telling them all about the hero exam. So, you incoming heroes, only around 40 of you can end up making it of the 100 or so that are here. So you just have to be in the top 0.5%, basically. There's going to be 3 types of robots that give you points. The 1-pointer, 2-pointer, and 3-pointer. They get harder as the points progress. However, the hardest robot is actually a 0-pointer, a towering robot that you are best to just avoid, as if it gets its hands on you, you're most likely just going to not be able to destroy a single robot after that, being captured for the remaining time of the entrance exam. So as Izuku would be seen stretching, waiting for the doors to open, as once they cracked open, Izuku would jump straight through the crack, as many of the people would end up looking on, laughing at Izuku. Oh, there's that overconfident person again. Guess he failed now, he's probably going to be disqualified having jumped the gun too early. However, President Mike would come over the intercom urging for everyone to follow Izuku. However, once they arrived, as the doors fully opened, they would see a pile of robots and robot parts just lying everywhere. As many of the teachers couldn't believe it, Izuku moved with such speed and precision, and yet he never laid a hand on any of the robots. Nezu would end up looking down at Izuku's sheet to tell everyone what his quirk was. However, when it was said he was quirkless, Nezu was even more shocked. What could his power be? He can't be quirkless. Maybe the doctors got something wrong. It looks like he has some extreme telekinesis quirk. As he would look on to see Izuku standing there, as all of the robots in front of him would easily just be destroyed, as it looked like punches would end up happening, as holes would end up being punched through the robots. Nezu just couldn't think of it. As Nezu was continue on thinking, he would end up just going unanswered. He couldn't think of what Izuku could possibly have with this power. So as Izuku would continue on fighting all of these robots, he would end up seeing a massive 0-pointer shake the ground beneath him, roaming right towards Izuku. As Izuku would end up seeing 2 people staring up directly at the 0-pointer, these of course being a pink-skinned person and a black spiky-haired person, which were also taking the entrance exam. Izuku would rush in, grabbing both of them and yanking them back, as right where they were standing, a foot slammed down into the concrete. Izuku would grab them, running off, telling them that they need to be more careful. As many more 0-pointers would then encircle the area, as Izuku would tell everyone that they are going to need to work together if they want to defeat the 0-pointer. As Izuku would rush towards one of them, punching its foot, as the foot of the 0-pointer would then start to contort, changing as it was then molded into the ground. Izuku would then hear over the intercom that the test had finished and that they may now leave. As Izuku was leaving, he would end up being thanked by those 2 people, as Izuku would say, "Oh, it's no problem," before walking back to his house. We cut to see Nezu sitting in his dark office as it was late at night. He was wondering what could this person's power possibly be. Was he lying about being quirkless? Who would lie about that? It's just a liability. So as Nezu would continue on thinking, he would end up going to the vast UA library, where he would look on through the power section much like Izuku had when he had gotten his stand. As Nezu would end up finding a very old-looking book, which just happened to be the exact same type of book that Izuku had. It wasn't the same copy, but it was the exact same book. As Nezu would end up scrolling through it, he would end up seeing what stands are and all about this. As Nezu would put the old-looking book back, however, as soon as he put it back, it would just deteriorate into dust. That's how old this book just happened to be. So as Nezu would end up thinking about this, he would then realize, so, There's a stand user in UA now. This could be quite a fun year. And that is where part 1 of What If Deku Had Crazy Diamond is going to be left off. Part 2 is coming out tomorrow, or it's already out if you're watching this in the future. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.